Lost in the endless dark, the silence inside the broken spaceship was heavy, almost like a living thing. Every corner of the ship was cold and empty. The lights had died long ago, and now only small emergency lamps blinked weakly. The air smelled of burnt metal and old smoke. Hidden in a dark corner, Liara sat quietly, hugging her knees to her chest. Her skin was pale, and her once bright eyes had grown dull from hunger and fear. She wore a torn uniform that barely kept her warm. Her body was shaking, not just from the cold but from weakness. It had been days, maybe even weeks, since she had eaten properly. Liara was alone. She had once been part of a proud exploration team. Her people, the Alari, believed in discovering new worlds and new life. But this mission had turned into a nightmare. Their ship had been attacked by pirates, unknown raiders who destroyed everything without mercy. Liara had managed to hide when the attack happened, but everyone else, she didn't even want to think about them. At first, she believed that rescue would come. Someone had to notice a missing ship. Someone had to care, but no one came. As the days passed, hope faded. She rationed what little food she had found, but eventually even the emergency packs ran dry. The water recycling unit broke, and now she was surviving by licking condensation from the walls. Every small sound made her jump. Every flicker of light raised her hopes only to crush them again. Sometimes she thought she heard voices, whispers in the air. Maybe it was her mind playing tricks on her. Maybe it was the ship itself, groaning and shifting as it slowly fell apart. Still, she could not stop listening. Sometimes the voices sounded kind. Sometimes they sounded angry. One night, or maybe it was day, she could not tell anymore. Liara sat against the wall and stared into the dark hallway stretching before her. The endless dark. Her heart felt heavy. She thought about her home, about the green rivers of her world, about her mother's laughter. She thought about warm food and soft beds. She thought about what it meant to die alone in the cold. Her stomach growled a weak, painful sound. She pressed her hand against it, trying to silence the hunger. Tears blurred her vision, but she quickly wiped them away. Crying wasted energy. She could not afford it. Then, out of nowhere, a low rumble shook the ship. Dust fell from the ceiling, the lights flickered. Liara's heart raced. She pressed her back against the wall and listened carefully. Was it another collapse? Had the ship finally given up? No. It was different. Through the cracks in the walls, she saw a soft, golden glow growing stronger. A ship. Someone was landing, outside. Rescue? Or raiders? Liara's mind screamed at her to run, to hide deeper into the ship, but her body refused to move. She was too weak, too tired. She could only wait, frozen with fear. A loud hiss echoed through the hallway as a door somewhere opened. Heavy boots stepped inside. The sound was sharp and clear in the silence. 1, 2, 3 steps. Then a pause, a faint clicking noise like someone checking a scanner. Liara held her breath. The steps moved again, this time closer to her hiding spot. She could see a shadow now, tall and broad. Whoever it was, they were moving carefully, not like a raider, looking for loot, but like someone searching for something or someone. The figure paused just a few feet away from her. "Hello?" a voice called softly. Not harsh, not cruel. Soft and careful. Liara's heart hammered in her chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could vanish into the wall. "I'm here to help," the voice said again. Help? She wanted to believe it desperately, but she had heard too many lies in her life. She stayed silent, hoping he would leave. Instead, the figure knelt down and placed something on the floor. It slid gently across the metal toward her. A small packet. She could smell it even from where she sat. Food. Real food. Liara's hands trembled. She wanted it. She needed it. But what if it was poisoned? What if this was a trick? The figure did not move closer. He simply sat there waiting. Minutes passed. Long, painful minutes. Finally, hunger won. Liara crawled forward, her fingers barely brushing the packet. She pulled it close and tore it open with shaky hands. The smell was almost too much to bear. Without thinking, she took a small bite. Warmth spread through her body like fire. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time she did not wipe them away. For the first time in what felt like forever, Liara was not alone. But deep in her heart, a question still burned. Who was this stranger, and why was he here? The darkness around her seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The stranger in the dark, the aftermath of the rescue, had left the spaceship in a state of eerie silence. Within the dim corridors and abandoned rooms, Liara's heart was still racing from the unexpected gift of food. She had barely recovered from the shock when another series of events began to unfold, a shift in the atmosphere that hinted at something new and uncertain. The low hum of the ship was broken by an almost imperceptible tapping, as if footsteps were approaching from the distance. Liara, still weak and in disbelief from her recent taste of nourishment, struggled to catch her breath. Somewhere in the mix of shadows and flickering emergency lights, a faint sound called to her, a soft, almost musical whisper that did not sound like any mechanical noise. Curious yet cautious, she inched away from her hiding place, her eyes darting around for the source of the sound. The silence, however, continued to thicken the air. Suddenly, in the middle of a long corridor cluttered with scattered debris, a figure emerged. His form was tall and slightly obscured by the gloom, and for a moment nothing could be seen except the subtle movement of his outline. He moved in a deliberate, measured way, as though he had been expecting someone in this forsaken place. Liara's pulse quickened. Every instinct told her to hide, to vanish into the cracks in the wall or beneath a piece of fallen metal, but curiosity, tempered by desperation, held her still. The figure paused in the middle of the corridor, as if he were weighing his options. Then, in a voice that was soft yet clear, he spoke. "Hello?" His tone was gentle and comforting, nothing like the harsh orders or threatening shouts that she had heard in stories of raiders and kidnappers. The voice echoed slightly in the empty space, and Liara felt a strange mix of fear and relief. She remained silent, too afraid to respond. The stranger did not push further. Instead, he took a step closer, his shadow merging with the sparse light from the emergency lamps. His presence was both unnerving and reassuring. "I'm here to help," he repeated softly, as if reassuring himself more than her. The simplicity of his words struck her. They carried neither promise of safety nor hints of deception. They were just words. Words that needed to be believed. His face, still hidden in the obscure light, was calm. The softness in his tone suggested that he was not here to harm anyone, but rather to offer a chance at relief from the endless isolation. The stranger slowly moved towards a flickering control panel on the wall, and his experienced fingers traced its outline. With deliberate caution, he tapped a few keys, and for a moment, the control panel lit up with a pale blue glow. In that light, Liara caught a glimpse of a small, faded emblem that looked like a human crest, a sign that he might be one of the humans, the ones who had always been a mystery to her. The corridor filled with the low hum of the machine as it powered on, and the stranger's attention shifted back to Liara. "Are you all right?" he asked in a careful murmur, as if afraid to wake a sleeping beast with his inquiry. His concern was genuine and seemed to reverberate in the quiet hall. Liara hesitated, weighed down by her own pain and skepticism, yet his sincere tone melted away a fraction of her fear. With great effort, she managed a small nod, though words failed her. In response, the stranger crouched down, keeping a respectful distance, and extended a hand towards her, a gesture that was both inviting and cautious. "Come with me," he said. "I have a safe place." His words, though simple, resonated, with a promise of a chance to escape the ship's clutches and her solitude. The corridor felt longer than it ever had before, as the stranger slowly walked ahead with Liara trailing behind, her body uncertain and her mind racing with questions. Who was this man? What did he know about her plight? And most importantly, could she trust him? The hum of the activated control panel seemed to mark the beginning of a shift in the narrative of her life. The air was now filled with anticipation, each step echoing with the promise of discovery, danger, and maybe even hope. As they moved, the stranger's every step was measured. Along the cracked walls, the shadows seemed to watch in silence, drawing out the suspense of every moment. The silence was occasionally broken by a distant sound, a metallic groan, a faint thump that made Liara's skin prickle. She clenched her hands and focused on the stranger's steady presence. His calm demeanor, the slight tilt of his head and the way his eyes seemed to scan the surroundings with both caution and determination, all spoke of someone who had seen much, endured hardships, and possibly lost too. The passage eventually led them to a small sealed room. The door was locked, but the stranger produced a small device from his pocket. It emitted a soft beep, and within seconds, the lock disengaged. As the door slid open, Liara was met with a gentle rush of fresh air, a rare luxury in the decaying confines of the spaceship. Inside the room, minimal furniture was arranged neatly, a couple of metal chairs, a table, and a small shelf that appeared to have some basic supplies. It looked like someone had once planned for survival in this desolate place. The room also contained a portable power unit that cast a soft, ambient glow. "This is my little haven," the stranger said quietly, as if sharing a secret. "I use it when I need to think, when I need to rest from the shadows of the outside." His words carried an intimacy that made the space feel welcoming, despite its barren surroundings. As Liara stepped into the room, she could almost believe that there was a possibility, a tiny spark of hope that maybe this encounter was not a trap, but a turning point. The stranger moved to a corner and sat down, giving her space to observe and absorb the quiet security of this refuge. Outside, the unknown still lurked, as the spaceship groaned and creaked with secrets. Inside, however, a simple human touch had brought a new feeling: trust. Yet every trust was fragile, and every promise came with its own doubts. For Liara, the night was far from over. As she took a cautious seat and the stranger began to explain in hushed tones his story of survival in the vast emptiness of space, the suspense returned in waves. His narrative held hints of betrayal, loss, and battles fought on distant planets, stories that intertwined with her own silent suffering. The space between them was filled with unspoken questions and the shared hope that maybe, just maybe, they were both the missing pieces of a puzzle that had long been broken. In that quiet, modest room, the story of two survivors began to intertwine, an unfolding mystery, a gentle promise of safety, and a pledge to confront the dark unknown together. The stranger's presence was a spark in the relentless void, igniting a cautious optimism in Liara's wearied heart, even as the silence of the ship whispered the dangers that still lay ahead. Fragile trust. The room was small, but to Liara, it felt like stepping into another world. The soft hum of the power unit, the quiet stillness of the air, and the presence of the human stranger all made her nerves tingle with uncertainty. She had not spoken a real word to anyone for so long that her throat felt tight just thinking about it. The man, he had introduced himself as Nathan, moved slowly, careful not to startle her. He placed a small metal box on the table and opened it. Inside were a few food packets, a small water purifier, and some basic medical supplies. To Liara, it was a treasure chest. "You need more food," Nathan said in a low voice, sliding one of the packets toward her. Liara stared at it, her body torn between hunger and fear. The food could be poisoned. The man could be lying. Yet every instinct told her that if she didn't eat, she would not survive much longer. Her fingers, still trembling, reached out and pulled the packet toward herself. She took small bites, her eyes never leaving Nathan. He did not push her. He simply sat back in his chair, his hands resting openly on the table to show he had no weapons. Ready. The room was silent except for the small sounds of her eating and the distant groaning of the dying ship around them. After a long while, Nathan spoke again. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Liara hesitated. Giving her name meant giving a part of herself. But looking into his calm, tired eyes, she whispered, "Liara." Nathan nodded, as if the name was something precious. It's good to meet you, Lyara. A silence settled between them again, but this time it was not filled with fear. It was filled with something else, something like understanding. Still, Lyara remained cautious. Trust was fragile. Like thin glass, once broken, it could never be whole again. Nathan seemed to sense her struggle. He pulled out a small, battered device from his jacket and placed it on the table. The screen blinked to life, showing a map of the ship. "The ship is breaking down," he said. "The oxygen will run out in a few days. We have to find a way out." Lyara leaned forward, studying the map. The escape pods, most of them were either destroyed or locked. But there was one, hidden deep in the lower decks, that still showed a green signal, active. Hope flickered in her heart, but also fear. Getting to the lower decks would not be easy. Nathan pointed to the path they would have to take. Narrow corridors, collapsed passages, and worst of all, the engine core. The core was unstable. Any wrong move could trigger an explosion. "We'll have to move carefully," he said. "And together." The word "together" echoed in Lyara's mind. Could she really trust him? Before she could answer, the ship shuddered violently. A low, growling noise filled the air. Dust fell from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance something metallic crashed to the floor. Nathan stood up quickly, his body tense. "They're here," he whispered. "Who?" Lyara's voice barely made. It passed her dry lips. Nathan didn't answer immediately. He moved to the door, peeking through the small crack. Lyara followed, her heart hammering in her chest. Through the shadows they saw movement. Creatures. They were not human, nor Illyri. They were something else. Metallic beasts, crawling on long, sharp legs, their eyes glowing a deadly red. "Scavenger, drones," Nathan said under his breath. "Designed to strip dead ships, and anything still alive inside." Lyara's stomach turned. She had heard of such things. Machines left behind after battles, programmed to kill anything that moved and harvest whatever remained. "They can smell body heat," Nathan said quickly. "If we stay here, they'll find us." Without thinking, he grabbed a thin emergency blanket from the shelf and tossed it to Lyara. "Wrap yourself. It'll mask your heat signature." She obeyed, wrapping the blanket around herself tightly. Nathan did the same. The two of them crouched low, barely breathing as the drones moved closer. Their sharp legs clicked and scraped against the metal floor, sending chills down Lyara's spine. One of them paused right outside the door, its red eyes scanning. Lyara closed her eyes, willing herself to become invisible. Any movement, any sound, and they would be dead. The drone's sensors flickered. For a moment, Lyara thought it had found them. Her whole body froze in terror. But then a loud crash echoed from somewhere else in the ship. The drone turned away, drawn by the noise, and scuttled down the hall. Only then did Lyara dare to breathe. Nathan's face was tight with tension, but his eyes met hers with a fierce determination. "We can't stay here," he said. "We move now." Lyara nodded. The choice was simple: stay and die, or trust the human and fight for a chance to live. Every part of her screamed to run, to hide. But she pushed those fears down. She had survived alone this long. But maybe, just maybe, survival now meant learning to move forward. Together. And so, without another word, Lyara followed Nathan into the deadly darkness of the ship. Each step, a gamble between life and death. Each breath a fragile promise that somewhere beyond the endless dark, there was still a future waiting for them. Fight for survival. The hallway stretched out before them, dark and broken like the ribs of a dying beast. Jagged wires hung from the ceiling, sparking weakly. The air smelled of smoke and old metal, and every step Lyara and Nathan took felt loud, far too loud, in the heavy silence. Nathan led the way, moving with careful practiced steps. Lyara followed close behind, clutching the thin emergency blanket tightly around her. Every sound made her heart jump. Every shadow looked like another scavenger drone waiting to pounce. They moved down one passage after another, weaving through the broken remains of the ship. Sometimes they had to crawl under fallen beams or squeeze through tight cracks. Each time, Liara felt her strength slipping away. Her body was still weak from starvation and fear, but she pushed herself forward, matching Nathan's pace. They couldn't afford to stop. Behind them, they could hear the faint clicking of metallic legs, growing louder and closer. The scavenger. Drones were tracking them. Almost there, Nathan whispered, glancing back at her. The engine core is just ahead. We have to cross it to reach the escape pod bay. Liara nodded, though fear gripped her chest like iron chains. She had heard stories about damaged cores. They were unpredictable, deadly. A single wrong move could set off a chain reaction, turning the whole ship into a floating grave. Still, she had no choice. She trusted Nathan now, trusted him more than the darkness or the cold. They reached a large, heavy door half buried under debris. Nathan forced it open just enough for them to slip through. What they saw inside made Liara gasp softly. The engine core room was massive, a wide open space filled with broken machinery and shattered panels. In the center, the core itself, still, glowed faintly, a sickly blue light pulsing from deep cracks in its surface. The room was filled with misty vapor leaking from broken pipes, and the air was heavy with the scent of burning metal. The ground was unstable, littered with fallen debris and large gaps where the floor had collapsed. "Stay close," Nathan said, stepping carefully onto the nearest stable-looking piece of metal. "Only step where I step. The floor might not hold." Liara swallowed hard and followed him. They moved slowly, balancing across fallen beams and broken platforms. The blue light from the core made their shadows dance wildly on the walls, giving the whole room a ghostly, haunted feeling. They were halfway across when Liara heard it, a sharp click. Then another, followed by a soft, grinding hum. Her heart stopped. Through the mist she saw them, 3 scavenger drones crawling out from the wreckage, their red eyes glowing like tiny fires. Nathan saw them too. "Run," he said, his voice low and fierce. They bolted. Behind them, the drones screeched and clattered forward, their sharp legs scraping across the metal. Beams creaked and bent under their weight. The whole room seemed to tilt and sway. Liara's breath came in ragged gasps as she ran, following Nathan over the unstable floor. Debris crumbled beneath her feet, and once she nearly slipped into a deep pit, barely catching herself in time. A drone leapt from a broken platform, landing just a few meters behind her. Its metallic claws reached out, slashing the air. Nathan spun around, pulling a small battered blaster from his jacket. He fired a quick shot, hitting the drone square in its core. Sparks exploded and the machine collapsed in a smoking heap. "Keep moving," he shouted. They ran, dodging fallen beams and jumping over cracked gaps. The core's sickly blue light pulsed, faster now, almost like it was alive, sensing the chaos around it. Another drone lunged at them from the side. Liara ducked instinctively, and Nathan fired again. But this time, the blaster only sputtered. Out of energy. "No," Nathan muttered under his breath. The drone came closer, its sharp limbs gleaming. Without thinking, Liara grabbed a loose metal rod from the ground and swung it as hard as she could. The rod smashed into the drone's head, sending it crashing into the floor with a heavy thud. Liara stood there, breathing heavily, her hands shaking. Nathan gave her a quick, amazed look. "Nice swing." Before she could answer, the last drone charged them. This time they had no weapon, no blaster, just broken pieces of a dying ship and the will to survive. Nathan grabbed a broken pipe and held it like a spear. Liara picked up another rod, her muscles screaming in protest. Together they faced the last drone. It attacked with a terrible screech, metal claws flashing. They fought together, striking and dodging. The drone was fast, but they were desperate. Each hit they landed pushed it back. Each near miss filled the air with sparks and the smell of burning oil. Finally, with a loud, shuddering crash, Nathan drove his pipe deep into the drone's core. The machine shuddered violently, then fell still. For a moment, neither of them moved. They were alive. But the victory was short-lived. The engine core, weakened by the battle, gave a low, rumbling groan. Cracks spread across its surface like spiderwebs. The pulsing blue light turned red. "The core's going critical," Nathan shouted. "We have to go, now." They sprinted across the last stretch of broken ground, the whole room shaking violently under their feet. Pieces of the ceiling began to fall. Fire burst from broken pipes. They barely made it through the far door before the engine core behind them exploded in a deafening roar. The shockwave slammed them forward, throwing them into the next hallway. Liara hit the ground hard, gasping for air. She turned her head to see Nathan lying a few feet away, unconscious, a deep gash bleeding on his forehead. Panic gripped her heart. They had survived the drones. They had escaped the engine core. But now, with the ship falling apart around them, Liara realized the fight for survival was far from over. And this time, she would have to save him. Breathless escape, the ship groaned around her, a low, terrible sound that vibrated through the broken metal walls. Liara forced herself to her knees, every muscle in her body aching. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. She crawled toward Nathan, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. His eyes were closed, his face pale under the thin layer of soot that covered his skin. Blood trickled from the gash on his forehead, and for one terrifying moment, Liara thought he might already be gone. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her hands trembled as she shook him gently. "Nathan, wake up, please." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a weak groan, Nathan's eyelids fluttered open. He blinked up at her, confusion clouding his gaze. But he was alive. Relief flooded through Liara so sharply that she almost cried. "You have to get up," she said urgently, grabbing his arm and trying to pull him up. "The ship is falling apart." Nathan gritted his teeth and pushed himself into a sitting position. He looked around, dazed, trying to understand where they were. The hallway ahead of them was a twisted mess of metal and fire. Behind them, the engine room was a wall of roaring flames. There was only one way forward, and it was closing fast. "Escape pods," Nathan rasped, his voice barely audible. Liara nodded, wrapping his arm over her shoulders. He was heavy, his body sagging against hers, but she tightened her grip and forced herself to stand. Together they stumbled down the broken hallway. Every step was a battle. The ground shook beneath them, sending new cracks racing along the floor. Smoke poured from the walls. Emergency alarms wailed somewhere deep in the ship, a shrill, hopeless sound. Twice they had to stop and find another way when fire blocked their path. Once a section of the ceiling collapsed just ahead of them, sending a blast of hot air and debris across their faces. Liara's lungs burned with every breath. Her legs screamed for rest. But she did not stop. She couldn't. Nathan's life depended on her now, just as her own had depended on him. Finally, after what felt like an endless nightmare, they reached a heavy blast door marked with faded letters. "Escape pod bay," but the door was partially crushed, its frame twisted from the ship's earlier explosions. Liara's heart sank. "No," she whispered, staring at it in horror. Nathan leaned heavily against the wall, breathing hard. His face twisted in pain as he looked at the door. "We have to force it open." Liara knew he didn't have the strength. He could barely stand. It would have to be her. She set him down carefully against the wall, then turned to the door. Grabbing a broken pipe from the floor, she wedged it into the gap and pushed with all the strength she had left. The door groaned but did not move. She tried again, gritting her teeth, her muscles shaking with effort. Still nothing. Behind them, the fires roared louder. The heat grew unbearable. The ship gave a terrible lurch and Liara stumbled, barely catching herself. "One more time," Nathan said hoarsely, trying to stand, trying to help. Liara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering every last bit of strength and willpower she had. Then she screamed and shoved with all her might. The door shifted, just an inch, but it was enough. Liara dropped the pipe and squeezed through the gap, dragging Nathan behind her. The escape pod bay was a mess. Most of the pods were missing or damaged. Only one remained, hanging crookedly in its launch cradle, its outer shell scorched but intact. Hope flared inside her chest. They could make it. She pulled Nathan toward the pod, stumbling and slipping on the uneven floor. The alarms inside the bay screamed louder now, warning of total structural failure. Liara threw open the pod's hatch. Inside, it was cramped and dark, but the system still flickered with weak light. It was still working. Barely. With a final desperate heave, she helped Nathan inside, then crawled in after him. The hatch hissed shut behind them, sealing out the smoke and fire. For a moment, everything was silent except for the ragged sound of their breathing. Then the pod's computer spoke in a cold, mechanical voice. Launch sequence initiated. Liara fumbled with the controls, her hands shaking so badly she could barely press the buttons. Outside, the ship shook violently. She could hear it breaking apart. With a final burst of light, the pod launched into space. They were thrown back into their seats as the small craft shot away from the dying ship, tumbling through the blackness. Through the tiny viewport, Liara watched as the ship behind them exploded in a massive ball of fire, pieces scattering like broken stars across the void. She sat there, breathing hard, staring at the wreckage. They had made it. But survival had a price. She looked at Nathan, slumped, unconscious again beside her. His breathing was shallow but steady. They were alive. For now, the pod's oxygen levels were low, the food supplies almost non-existent. The navigation system was damaged and the nearest colony was days away. They had escaped death. But the real fight for survival was only beginning. Liara closed her eyes and leaned back against the cold wall of the pod. She had trusted a human, and now, somewhere in the endless dark, she would have to believe in something even harder. Hope. Hearts in the void, the escape pod floated silently through the endless black sea of space. Outside the small, cracked window, there was nothing but cold stars and darkness stretching forever in all directions. The only sound inside was the soft hum of the pod's failing life support and the slow, painful breathing of the two survivors. Liara sat curled in her seat, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her body ached from exhaustion, and her throat was dry from breathing the recycled air. Every breath tasted of metal and fear. Nathan was still unconscious, lying strapped into the narrow bed beside her. The cut on his forehead had stopped bleeding, but his face was pale and his body burned with fever. Liara had done everything she could with the limited supplies, bandaging his wound, adjusting the broken medical unit, but it wasn't enough. She touched his hand gently. It was cold. A lump formed in her throat. They had escaped the fire, escaped the collapsing ship, fought through machines and falling debris. But now, trapped inside a dying pod, they were fighting something even harder. Time. Liara glanced at the pod's dashboard. The oxygen level was dropping steadily. 90 minutes left, maybe less if the filters failed completely. Food supplies were a single crushed ration pack. Water was nearly gone. And the worst part, no working beacon. They were invisible to the universe. Alone. For the first time, real fear crept into Liara's heart. Not the sharp fear of danger, but the slow, heavy fear of being forgotten. Dying here, drifting forever between stars with no one even knowing their names. She looked back at Nathan. He had saved her. He could have left her behind, but he hadn't. Even when she had been weak, broken, nothing but a fading breath in a broken ship, he had chosen to stay. He had fought for her life. Now it was her turn. She reached out and gripped his hand tightly. "You're not going to die here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I won't let you." The pod shuddered suddenly, a violent tremor shaking the tiny craft. Warning lights flashed weakly across the dashboard. Liara's heart jumped into her throat. Micrometeorites, small, deadly pieces of rock zipping through space, like invisible bullets. Even one small strike could tear the pod apart. Liara threw herself over Nathan's body, shielding him as best she could. The pod was hit again. A sharp crack split the air and a thin line appeared across the window. Oxygen hissed out in a soft, terrible sound. Panic gripped her chest. She scrambled to the emergency repair kit, finding a small sealant patch. Her hands shook as she slapped it over the crack, pressing with all her weight until the hissing stopped. The pod was still holding together, for now, but Liara knew it was only a matter of time. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. She couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Not when Nathan needed her. Pulling herself back to his side, she checked his breathing. Again. Still shallow. Still alive. "Come on, Nathan," she whispered. "You're human. You're supposed to be stubborn." She smiled weakly at her own words, a small, broken smile. Outside the window, a soft light blinked in the distance. Liara's breath caught. Was it a ship? A colony beacon? A signal? She leaned closer, heart pounding. No. It was just a star, flickering cold and indifferent. Hope slipped through her fingers like dust. The silence inside the pod grew heavier, pressing down on her chest until she could hardly breathe. She leaned her head against the cold metal wall, staring up at the tiny ceiling, searching for answers she didn't have. Why did he help me? She wondered. Why risk his life for a stranger? Nobody had ever done that for her before, not on her homeworld, not among her own kind. Their weakness was punished and failure was forgotten. But Nathan had looked at her, broken, starving, useless, and had seen something worth saving. That thought lit a small fire inside her, weak, but real. She wouldn't let that fire die. Slowly, she unstrapped herself and moved to the navigation panel. Most of the systems were dead, but the thrusters still had a little power left. She didn't know exactly where they were, but she had seen the colony maps before. The nearest human outpost was somewhere on the edge of this sector. If she could point them even a little in the right direction, maybe someone would find them before the oxygen ran out. Her fingers danced over the broken controls, coaxing life from the dying pod. A weak pulse from the engines answered her. The pod shifted slightly, changing direction, its nose tilting toward the distant edge of the starfield. Liara slumped back into the seat, her whole body shaking from the effort. She didn't know if it would work. She didn't know if anyone would find them in time. But at least they wouldn't die standing still. Beside her, Nathan stirred, a soft, pained sound escaping his lips. "Liara," he whispered. She turned to him quickly, her heart leaping. "I'm here," she said, taking his hand again. His eyes opened a fraction, glassy and unfocused, but when he saw her, a faint smile touched his lips. You didn't leave me," he murmured. "Never," she said fiercely. Outside, the stars burned, cold and silent. Inside, two hearts beat in defiance of the darkness, and somewhere beyond the void, hope flickered once more. A new beginning, the hours stretched into a painful blur inside the tiny escape pod. Every second was a battle. Every breath grew harder. The oxygen alarm blinked angrily now, warning them of what they already knew. Time was running out. Liara sat at Nathan's side, her head resting against the cold metal wall, her body too weak to move much. Her eyes stung from the dry air, but she forced herself to stay awake. If sleep came, she feared she would never wake again. Nathan drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering broken words that Liara could barely understand. Sometimes he called her name. Sometimes he spoke of things she did not know, green fields, blue skies, a place called Earth. She listened to him quietly, her heart aching. Outside, the stars spun slowly. The pod drifted toward nothingness. Then, through the heavy silence, a soft beeping sound echoed inside the pod. Liara lifted her head slowly, barely daring to hope. The pod's dying sensors had picked up something. A signal. Weak, distant, almost, too faint to notice, but it was there. Her fingers shook as she pressed the battered communication panel. Static filled the cabin, but beneath it she heard a voice. "Unidentified pod. This is Station Asteron. Do you copy?" Tears welled up in Liara's eyes. She pressed the transmit button, her voice cracking. "This is Escape Pod. Survivors on board. Need assistance." There was a long pause. Then the voice returned, stronger this time. "We read you. Hang tight. We're sending a shuttle." Liara leaned back in her seat, her whole body trembling with relief. She looked at Nathan, who was still unconscious, and squeezed his hand gently. "We made it," she whispered. But survival was still not certain. The pod's oxygen levels dipped lower and lower. The air grew thin, harder to pull into her lungs. Her vision blurred at the edges. Every heartbeat felt slower, heavier. She didn't know how much longer they could hold on. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time had lost all meaning. Then, through the small window, she saw it. A ship, sleek and silver, cutting through the darkness like a blade of hope. Its lights blinked softly as it approached, growing larger and larger until it filled the window. Liara tried to stand, but her legs buckled. She crawled to the hatch, forcing herself to stay awake. A loud clang echoed through the pod as the rescue ship latched onto them. The hatch hissed open, and bright, clean air flooded inside, making Liara gasp. Figures in white suits rushed into the pod, their faces hidden behind smooth helmets. Hands grabbed her gently, lifting her out, wrapping her in a warm blanket. "You're safe now," someone said. Safe. The word didn't feel real. "Him," she croaked, pointing weakly at Nathan. "Help him." They nodded and moved quickly, lifting Nathan onto a stretcher, checking his vitals, attaching medical patches to his chest and head. As they carried them onto the rescue ship, Liara's vision dimmed, the world spinning around her. But before she passed out, she heard Nathan's voice, faint but alive. "Liara," and she smiled. When Liara opened her eyes again, she was lying in a soft bed. Real sheets, clean air, soft lights. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then she turned her head and saw Nathan sitting beside her bed, his arm in a sling, a small bandage on his forehead. His eyes were open, clear and warm. He smiled when he saw her awake. "You're stubborn," he said, his voice teasing but filled with something deeper. "You saved us." "We saved each other," she whispered. Nathan chuckled softly, a sound that made her heart ache with strange, new emotions. They were alive. They had fought the darkness, and won. Later, they learned the station had picked up their faint signal just minutes before it would have disappeared forever. They learned that their story, their survival, had already begun to spread across the human colonies like wildfire, a tale of hope in the darkest places. But for Liara and Nathan, none of that mattered as much as what was between them now. Something. Fragile but real. Something that had been born not in safety but in the fire and fear of survival. Trust, friendship, something stronger. They stood together on the viewing deck of the station, looking out into the endless stars. The past was behind them, the loneliness, the fear, the near-death. Ahead of them stretched a new future, unwritten, wide, and free. "Where will you go now?" Nathan asked, his voice low. Liara looked at him, her heart full. "Wherever you go," she said. He smiled, and this time, it wasn't just hope in his eyes, it was a promise. Together they turned away from the window and walked forward, leaving the endless dark behind, toward a new beginning.